All right. Shalom Aleichem and welcome everyone as we are preparing for Shabbat Kodesh, Shabbat Parashat Vayikra, as we're starting a new Sefer, the Sefer Torat Kohanim, as well as it being the Shabbat before Purim, so it's Parshat Zachor. B'ezrat Hashem, we'll learn a few lessons from Parshat Vayikra, and we'll try to connect one of the lessons to Parshat Zachor as well. Let's start with Parshat Vayikra, Sefer Vayikra. Baruch Shechianu v'kimonu v'giyonu l'zman hazeh, that we have the opportunity to start Parshat Vayikra, and the first word that we look, and you pick up the Torah and they do Hagbo, and you look at the Torah, and you see all the Chumashim also make this note that Vayikra, the last letter of the word Vayikra, is a small aleph. Why is it a small aleph? So the Baal HaTurim explains, the Baal HaTurim says that Moshe Rabbeinu was told by Hashem, write Vayikra. Vayikra with an aleph means Hashem lovingly called Moshe Rabbeinu directly. Hashem wanted to speak to him. Moshe Rabbeinu, we know, it's going to say in Sefer Bamidbar, he's Anav Mikol Adam, he's the most humblest person. He didn't want the whole world to see that Hashem was calling him directly. So he said, Hashem, instead of writing Vayikra, let's write Vayikar. Just like it said by Bil'am, that Hashem chanced upon them. It was they met. It wasn't that Hashem specifically wanted to meet with Moshe. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to write. Just like the way Hashem spoke to Bil'am the prophet. It's Vayikar, he just met him and he started to speak. Hashem said no. Hashem said you have to write it with the aleph. So Moshe Rabbeinu made a compromise and he wrote it with a small aleph. The only issue with the whole this pshat is that this is not the first time in the Torah that it says Vayikra al Moshe. It says in Sefer Shemot, Vayikra al Moshe, and there is no small aleph. It's a regular aleph. So why over here suddenly he makes a whole deal? I don't want it to be big. So Rav Shach explains. Rav Shach explains that every midah that a person has, every time you develop a midah, a person becomes an ish emes, person becomes someone who's calm, someone whatever. It doesn't start in one instant. It comes over time. So in Sefer Shemot, Moshe Rabbeinu, he was an ish anav, he was still a humble person, but he was working on this midah. And so maybe there was no problem spelling Vayikra. But now, the Moshe Rabbeinu already built up his humility even more as we're meeting him in Sefer Vayikra. So at this point, Moshe Rabbeinu says, I can't write aleph anymore. There I was that Moshe. Now I'm already more anav, more special. I can't write a aleph, big aleph at the end. The Kotzker Rebbe brings here to explain a Midrash Tanchuma. The Midrash Tanchuma is in the end of Parshat Kitisa, and it's based on this Baal HaTurim. If you understand it based on this Baal HaTurim, you're going to understand the whole Midrash. The Midrash there says that Moshe Rabbeinu, after he came down with the Luchot, his face was very shiny. So much so that the people couldn't stand it. He had to wear a mask over his face. He learned Torah, he took it off. He had the panim of light coming out of him. The Midrash explains, you know where this light came from? Where does light come from? It came because of the extra ink left over from his writing of the Sefer Torah. What does this mean? So the Rebbe explains, because the Rebbe explains, Moshe Rabbeinu could have wrote Vayikra with a big aleph. But because he was an anav, he was an ish anav, he wrote Vayikra with a small aleph. That small aleph, the extra ink that would have been needed for the bigger aleph, that humility made his face light up with the Shekhinah. Moshe Rabbeinu's light from his face that came out was because he wrote the aleph small. He had anivut, he had humility. The Ramban, in his Igeretan, Ramban says that this is not something that Moshe Rabbeinu only is zocheh to. The truth is, any person who acts with humility, each on his own level. The Ramban writes, when you conduct yourself in a manner of humility, the Shekhinah and the luminescence of its glory will dwell upon a person. That shining, that shine, that light, as long as we cut out our aleph, right, and we make it smaller, who we are, we will be zochem to this extra shine, to this extra light, to this extra chen, this graciousness that falls upon people with humility. Rav Wolbe suggests a few ways how a person can work on being an anav, on his humility. First thing he says, you have to work on the davening. You have to be a person who davens, not just to daven to get it out of the way, but to really daven and say to Hashem, I'm all dependent on you. That's one way to break a person's ga'ava, his arrogance. It's not me. It's really nothing to do with me. It's all Hashem. That's number one. A second way, he says, a person has to be modeh al ha'emet. He has to be modeh to the truth. Meaning not to think that you're always right and you're always the right and the truth and everything. It's not your truth, but rather to be modeh al emet. You see something to be true, someone points out something right, something wrong that you did, to able to subjugate yourself to their view, he's already on humility. And he says the third and most important of all is to remember that we're mortal, that we're here today and we're gone tomorrow. If a person remembers that he's just flesh and blood, he'll have no sense of arrogance. He will be truly humble. So there's some ways that we can work on being humble. Here he brings down that this is dafka why Sefer Vayikra starts off with this Vayikra with a small aleph. The whole idea of korbanot is a way to come closer to Hashem. Korban, from karov, from close. When a person brings a korban, he's supposed to be thinking, oh, that's supposed to happen to me, I did a sin. How does that happen? When a person is an anav. A person says, you know what, Hashem, you're right, I'm wrong. And he realizes who he is compared to Hashem, and he wants to come closer to Hashem. You can't come closer to Hashem if you think that you're equal with Hashem HaShalom. If you're some big fancy guy that you're running the world, you can't come closer to Hashem that way. That's why Sefer Vayikra starts off this way. The Haidah points out that the word anav, the gematria, is 126. And the word be'eden, to be in the Garden of Eden, is also 126. He shares here a story of a great Chacham, Rav Salaman Mutzafi. And he was known for his anivut, for his humility. He never even allowed people to call him Chacham, except for one time. He was traveling from his country of Iraq, and he was coming to Israel, and he brought with him his entire library, all his Sfarim. And at the border, the Iraqi officials said he has to pay a large tax. He says, but my books, I need them. They say the only way you can get them if you're a Chacham. Chacham has permission to take his books with him. He was thinking what to do, and finally he said, you know what, I do learn and teach from these books. So the guard said, okay, they stamped on the books, Chacham, and they let him bring his books through. Finally, when he came to Eretz Yisrael, and he told over the story to Rav Tzadka Hutzin, he was crying. He said, you know, now that I'm thinking it over, it would have been better for me to leave my books there than for someone to call me Chacham. This is someone who really worked on his humility, knowing that he has to be humble. Rasul Chabon in Peshischa says, but how can a person look at himself and truly say, I'm humble? You know, I achieved so much, I did so much. So he said as follows. Imagine a person stands at the top of a mountain. Right? Does he think he's really that tall? Or he's just standing on top of a mountain? So he says, Moshe Rabbeinu realized he's very special, he's doing a lot of things. But it's because Hashem gave it to him. He's just standing on where Hashem put him. So he's not really that tall. It's all on Hashem. The Steipler Gaon said a similar analogy. He said, imagine a poor woman borrows a fancy gown for a wedding. Right? She does not spend the whole night talking about everyone about her fancy gown, because it's not hers. You know, she just borrowed it. He says the same thing. It doesn't mean you don't know what you have, a fancy gown or not. If you have talents, you have stuff. That's not mean anivut, that you pretend you don't have these qualities. Anivut means, being an anav, like Moshe Rabbeinu means, I know what I am. But I know it all comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We're taught, Chazal tell us, if you're running after kavod, right? If you're running after honor, honor runs away from you. If you run away from honor, then honor runs to you. So someone once said, in the end, if you think about it, if you're running to honor, honor runs away from you. So then you're never going to catch up because you're both running. But the same way also, if you run away from honor, honor is always running after you. You guys will never meet because as you're continuing to run, he's also running. So what does it mean? If you run away from honor, honor will run after you, but you're never going to meet. So I heard them say as follows: a person could only run so fast when he's younger. When he starts to get older, he slows down. But kavod doesn't slow down. So eventually, when you become older, now you're starting to slow down. Now the kavod will catch up to you, and you start to get your kavod. Someone once came to Simcha Banim of Peshischa and told him, I'm always running away from honor, and the honor is not catching up to me. So he says, right? You say, honor will catch up to me. So Simcha Banim told him, when you're running away, you're probably looking behind your shoulder. When you're looking behind your shoulder, kavod thinks you're running after him, so he runs the other way. So now you're both running the opposite ways. You're running away from honor. You can't look behind your shoulder to see where it is. We'll end up with one more idea based on this being of humility. He says over here from Yisrael of Rizhin, he brings this parable. There was a royal minister who frequently traveled throughout the kingdom, managing the king's many interests. Whenever he went, people gave him a lot of kavod. He was the king's minister. One time, the king decided he wanted to go with him. So now the king and this minister went together. But the king, most people, now these are the days before social media and pictures and Google, whatever it was, but people knew what the minister looked like. People didn't know what the king looks like. So now the king and him are traveling, and people are giving the minister kavod, and the king, they think it's one of his servants walking with him. The minister is very, very embarrassed. And he feels and the king is completely ignored. The minister is embarrassed. So Yisrael Rajin said, similarly, really it's the king of the universe giving us everything. And people are giving us kavod. We should feel very embarrassed that people are giving us kavod, because it's not for us kavod. Really? The kavod is Hashem's kavod. Therefore, that's the way a person has to look. I'll be finished in about 20 minutes. So you want to start then? Okay, they can start in 5 minutes. We'll catch up. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to our next lesson on this week's parasha. We have here, and this is from the Sefer V'Higadato of Rav Yaakov Galinsky, Zecher Tzadik Lebracha. It says, Nefesh ki teheta bishgaga. Almost all the kabbanot we bring for a sin, they're brought when you do it bishgaga. You do it by accident. If you think about it, if Galinsky says, I don't understand. Why do we make such a big deal about a person made it by accident? And he has to bring a korban, he has to put his hands on it and say they made a sin, he has to confess to it, the Kohanim have to eat it, and a whole to-do just because he made a mistake. Why does he have to go through all this? He just made a mistake, he accidentally turned on the lights on Shabbat. What's so bad? I made a mistake. So Rav Yaakov Galinsky, based on a midrash that we're all familiar with, Midrash Tanhuma, says, Shanu Rabotenu, mitzvah goreret mitzvah, v'avera goreret avera. Person does a mitzvah, it leads to another mitzvah. Person does an avera, it leads to another avera. Lo yatzer adam al avera she'asa b'shogeg. A person is not troubled if he committed one sin unintentionally. Person feels not so bad, I made a sin unintentionally. El sheniftach lo petach she'echtah v'afilu b'shogeg. But when you make an accidental sin, you're opening up room to sin again accidentally or even on purpose. I remember from Rav Shimshon Pinkus, he writes over there, he says, people don't understand that when they sin, they think they just sin and it goes into a book. On the notes, he sinned today. Since that's not what happens when a person sins. When a person sins, he's actually taking his neshama and destroying it. And so it's a whole different world. And I think this is what the Midrash is saying as well, that when you're sinning, even though it's an accident, you now created the ability to sin again, on purpose or by accident. The Gemara tells us, Kivan she'avar adam avera v'shana ba, na'aset lo keheter. A person who does an avera, and then does the avera again, it becomes like mutar for him, permissible to him. There's a person who doesn't do tshuva for something that he thinks is permitted, it continues to happen, and a person continues to sin. Why? Even if a person makes an accident, why does he think it's okay to continue? Because kol derech ish yashar be'inav, derech avel yashar be'inav. Everyone thinks that what he's doing is right, but that's really the way of the foolish. The foolish people don't stop to think what they're doing. Kol darchei ish zach be'inav. Mishlei says again, all the ways of a man are pure in his eyes. People think that what they're doing is the best. The proof is that he's repeating his sin. He did his mistake, it's just a mistake. And then it happens again, and this time he thinks it's okay. Rav Galinsky says, mistakes happen. It's normal. But the most important part after making a avera by mistake is, what is your reaction? How do you react to the mistake? If you think you didn't do anything wrong, then that's your biggest mistake. Then your accident is a big problem. But if you think you did something wrong and there's something to do about it, then your accident was just an accident and you're going to be able to do tshuva. Adam HaRishon ate from the Etz Hadat. His wife gave it to him. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, what happened? Instead of taking responsibility, he says, it's my wife. Hashem tells him, make teshuvah. You know what he says to Hashem? The Midrash says, he says to Hashem, I ate it, and I'll eat it again. It's not that Marishon said, and you know he made a mistake. And this past Yom Kippur, in our time, we Baruch Hashem went through this with the guys, the whole Midrash, and explained everything there. But Adam HaRishon pretty much says, I'm not admitting to my sin. Mistake, yeah, and I feel bad about it, but I'm not going to say those words. We have David HaMelech and Shaul HaMelech. It says, Shaul ba'ahat va'alata lo. Shaul sinned once, and it destroyed him. David b'shtayim v'lo alta lo. David HaMelech sinned 2 times, and it didn't bring him any problems. Rashi explains. Shaul, from the Haftarah that we're going to read on Shabbat, he was commanded to go and kill out the Amalekim and their animals and the king and everyone. And Shaul felt bad about killing all those animals. And so when he sees Shmuel come, he says, Baruch Hashem, I did what Hashem said to do. He didn't. But he says, Baruch Hashem, I did what Hashem said to do. Then Shmuel says, you didn't. He says, yes, I did. Finally, he admits at the end, and he says, it's not me, it's not my fault, it's the people. And Shmuel tells him that's not a way a king should act. And he loses the kingship because of this. David HaMelech has 2 sins. He's with a married woman, Bathsheba, and the Natan HaNavi comes and tells him, you made a sin, and right away, David HaMelech says, Chatati la Hashem. I sinned to Hashem. I really did. David HaMelech counts the Jewish people one by one. He causes a magefah. He finds out he made a mistake. He right away says, I made a mistake. That's the biggest difference. Is a person able to stop and say, I really made a mistake and understand it? Or is a person like Adam or like Shaul and they cannot come to admit? And admitting someone's mistake, that's one of the hardest things for a person to do. That's why we say every morning, we say, Lo'olam ye Adam, right? And then we say, O modeh al ha'emet. To be able, like we said, one of the things of humility is to be able to say, to admit to truth. That's one of the hardest things for a person to do, is to admit to truth. Because it's much easier just to pretend or do what's not the truth in order to make our minds more careful, more relaxed. The Gemara Masechet Yoma tells us, if a wealthy person says, I couldn't learn Torah because I was wealthy, they're going to tell him there was a rabbi, Rabbi Elazar ben Charsom, the wealthiest man is able to learn Torah. So it's not a good excuse. If a person says, I was poor, and because I was poor, I wasn't able to I wasn't able to learn. They say Hillel was so poor and he was able to learn, not excuse. Then they'll say, oh, I had a Yetzer Hara, I couldn't control it. They're going to say Yosef Tzaddik, right? The question really is, how could a person say, I have a Yetzer Hara and I couldn't control it? Yetzer Hara doesn't come all day to tell someone to do Avirah. Tzara shows up in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening. He doesn't show up all the time. So, Rav Galinsky explains as follows. He says, I was once on a train, traveling through Russia, and on the train there was a man, and the whole time he was screaming, I'm so thirsty, and the whole trip screaming, I'm thirsty. He wouldn't stop. He said, finally the train pulled into the station, and I said to him, Andre, give me your bottle. I'm going to go fill it up. And he went and he filled up the water and gave it to him. He filled it up again and gave it to him. Yet, afterwards, the train started to go. And now this man started to say, oh, how thirsty I was. Oh, how thirsty I was. And for the rest of the trip, he kept complaining how thirsty he was before. This is how a person gets trapped in the Yetzer Hara. First, Yetzer Hara makes you want to sin, and then he makes you think about the sin the whole time, how you couldn't control the Yetzer Hara. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, He created us. And Hashem knows that we have the ability to control ourselves. And that's why it's so important, the Korban. I made a mistake. You have to bring a Korban, because you have to realize you made a mistake. You have to realize that's a problem. You have to take control of that. And you have to react appropriately to that mistake. That was from Rav Yaakov Galinsky, an amazing piece of how to understand that even a mistake is a problem unless you're reacting to it appropriately. We'll end off with one more interesting idea and story. It says in the parasha, in chapter 5, verse 23, it says, so it should be, when he will sin, and he steals something, he has to return that. You cannot bring the korban for something unless if you stole something, you have to return what you stole before you bring the korban. Hashem's forgiveness follows after the thief has made peace with his victim. So if you steal something from someone, you can't just bring a korban and say, I'm fine. Just like I say on Yom Kippur, if you hurt somebody or did something to somebody, you have to appease him before you get tshuva. Same thing with this. A person stole something, he has to return it before he can bring a korban. Because if you really want to show you the tshuva, you have to do something about it. You can't just say, Hashem, I'm sorry for stealing, and continue to steal and keep it. Now, giving it back is a hard thing. Because, first of all, if you stole it, you probably needed it. Right? And you may have already used it, right? So it's not the easiest thing to return something that was stolen. Here in the Peninim al Torah, he shares an amazing story about a young man who grew up in a family that was traditional. They kept Shabbat dinner, they had Pesach, they had Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. They kept some of the halachot here and there. And after high school, his father gave him some money and told him to go into business. And he went into the business of styrofoam cups. He was selling styrofoam cups. And there was a lot of people, a lot of competition in this business, in the styrofoam cup business. So he started to sell at a cheaper price, but he wasn't really making much money. Eventually, he decided, what will happen if I take out, he sells 150 cups per box. So what happens if I take out one cup? It'll save me money, and no one's really counting all the cups in the box. So I'll take out one cup. And eventually one cup led to two cups led to 4 cups. And this was what he was doing. He was selling boxes that said 150 cups, but he only had 146 cups in the box. His business started getting better. He's selling more for less and he's making more money. But this man started to become more religious. His community became more religious. The shul became more religious. His children started going to yeshiva. And one of his sons said for his bar mitzvah, he wants to go to Eretz Yisrael. And the whole family went to Eretz Yisrael. And they had a tour, and they went to the Kotel, and they went to a lot of places. And while he was there, he started to feel very bad as he's becoming more religious, and yet he's stealing to make money. If only everyone felt that way. And he decided, he asked the tour guide, is there someone here, like a big rabbi in halakha, that I can go to ask him about my business? So they brought him to the great posek, Harav Yosef Shalom Elyashiv, Zecha Tzadik Livracha. And he got into a meeting with Rav Elyashiv. And he told him the whole story of how he used to sell 150 cups per box, and then he brought less and less and less, and now he's at 146. He says, I know my customers, not all of them are Jewish, but stealing is stealing and I feel bad. What can I do? Rav Elyashiv was quiet, looking at him. The man says, when Rav Elyashiv was looking at me, I didn't know where I should go. I felt so bad, I just wanted to dig a hole and go inside. So Rav Elyashiv turned to him and said, you know what? This is what you're going to do for Teshuvah. From now on, instead of putting 150 in the box, you're going to be putting 154 cups in the box. And this man was about to say, but I can't, it's too much. And the tour guide who came with him said, you can't ask questions in Rav Elyashiv. Rav Elyashiv says, this is what you have to do. That's what you have to do. So now he goes back home and he listens to the rabbi and he starts putting 154 in each box. His accountant calls him and says, listen, after a few months, I don't know what's happening, but you're losing a lot of money. It's the same product, we're selling it for the same amount, but we're spending more than we did before. We're losing money. The business is going down. And it was getting worse and worse. And all his money was going down. And one day he was so depressed, he said, I'm not going into work that day. And he decided he's going to stay home and just be depressed at home. And all of a sudden, his manager, one of the managers in the place that they work, calls him and says, you got to come in. He says, what do you mean? He says, you got to celebrate. Celebrate what? He says, you got to come in now. I got to tell you, I got to show you, we're going to have a big celebration. Couldn't believe it. But if his manager says he has to come in, he came in. He comes in, and the manager shows him the newspaper. The newspaper article, it was an expose. Some of the journalists decided to look into styrofoam cups. And they checked company after company. And every company was shortchanging their customers. They said 150. One company was putting 149. One company was putting 147. One company was putting 143. 7 cups less per box. The only company that they found that was giving more, not even just what they said, but more than what they were giving, was his company. 154 cups per box, where it says 150. After that day, his customers, his clientele went skyrocket because everybody wanted to deal with him because he was the only company that was being truthful. And from cups, they went to buy other things by him and other things by him. And eventually his business went way up. He listened to Rav Elyashiv. He did what he was told. He returned the Gezelah, right? He was stealing before. And now he was returning it. And Hashem helped him and accepted his teshuvah. This is what the Pasuk is telling us. Before you bring a korban, if you stole something, you have to return it. It's not okay to just think, this, that. People make up all of excuses. I hear people tell me all the time, but this, but that. They make me this, they make me that. They think it's okay. Chas v'shalom. Last year we spoke about the story of Mordechai Eliyahu, how when he found out somebody stole something, the guys that are rabbis in the Shema borrowed money when he was alive. And he didn't return it because he died. And the family, that neshama wasn't able to go into Gan Eden waiting to be able to pay that back. That's how important it is not to steal. And if we did Chas Shalom steal by accident, well, the Yetzer Hara got the better of us, to make sure to return it. So we had 3 lessons, just to sum it up. We had the first lesson of being humble, and all the stories that came with it. And what it means is to reduce ourselves a little bit and know that Hashem is really in charge. As well as our second lesson of not letting the Yetzer Hara take control of us. That means even when you make an accidental sin, you make an Averah by accident, you have to really feel bad about it and do something about it. And our third lesson, which was if Chas Shalom we stole, we have to return it. Shabbat Shalom leKulam.